Zach here. Today, I'm going to help you ace your AP World exam by giving you 5 specific pieces of information you can use during the essay portion. So, why do we exactly need to know the specific information to begin with? Well, in the AP World test, in all of the writing portions, the short answers, the long essays, and the document-based question, you need to be able to respond to the prompt using specific information from history that relates to the topic. What's important to remember is that this doesn't even have to come from the AP World curriculum. It could come from any other history course as long as it relates to the topic that you're writing about. One approach to having all of the specific information at your disposal could be to memorize as much history as you can so that you have as much facts as possible, so that most likely you'll have something that's relatable to the prompt. However, there is another way. You could remember several key historical events, figures, and places that each of them relate to so many different topics. That's the goal of this video. I'm giving you 5 main ideas that each have so many different topics relevant to them so that you can use it for almost every possible topic that you'll be writing about in the test. The first of these specific pieces of evidence is the City of Kashgar. Kashgar is a small city in the deserts of western China, and to be honest, in modern world history, it's pretty insignificant. However, it has been present during some of the largest events in world history. It was a major trade stop during the Silk Road and saw a lot of trade during that time frame. It can be used as a specific piece of evidence for that topic. It can also be used for specific evidence in the spread of Islam, as it was one of the farthest reaches of the spread of Islam into Central Asia. In addition, you could talk about the Mongols, as it was attacked and conquered by Genghis Khan during his expansion. In addition to that, in the 21st century, it's seen some events as the modern communist government of China has begun ethnic cleansing and other oppression against the Uyghur Muslims who live there, and that could be used for crimes against humanity or another related topic in your essay. The second piece of specific evidence is a man named Slobodan Milosevic. Although his name is quite hard to remember, Milosevic was the leader of Serbia during the Yugoslavia Wars, and this is something that happened in the 1990s and that can be tied to so many different topics. The Yugoslav Wars were basically where the nation of Yugoslavia broke up into smaller independent countries after the Cold War. This could be tied to nationalism because these different ethnic, cultural, and social groups wanted to be separate from each other and have their own nations. This could also be tied to the decline of communism and the rise of free markets, as Yugoslavia was a totalitarian communist state, and the nations that formed in its aftermath were much more free in their economic side. This could also be tied to atrocities, as there was a lot of ethnic cleansing that Milosevic conducted against the Muslims who lived in Bosnia, adjacent to Serbia. This can be tied to a lot of events across all of world history as complex historical thinking for the unicorn point of the last point in lots of the long essay questions and document-based questions, because you can relate it to almost any genocide that has happened in world history. You could also relate it to World War I, because the breakup of nations in the Balkan region of Europe, where Yugoslavia is, was the cause of World War I, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated due to problems in Bosnia and Serbia. You can also tie it to imperialism, as the United States and other European nations from NATO were heavily involved in this and took sides. The third specific piece of evidence is the French Revolution. The French Revolution is also really useful to use in essays just because of how many topics it touches on. It, like the Yugoslav Wars, also touches on nationalism, as the French people really desired to have a nation that would represent them personally. It also can be used to represent revolution for democracy, as the people were rising up to replace a monarchy with a more representative republic that would give them what they want as opposed to ruling them and oppressing them. This can also be tied to anything to do with uprisings about poverty or economic situation, as one of the major reasons why people were rising up in the French Revolution was because of the heavy taxation the government was enforcing upon them. You can tie that to communist Russia or any other communist nation, and many other uprisings where the poor peasants rose against the wealthier landlords. This is also a cause of a war. You can tie it to something like Pearl Harbor or the start of World War One or the start of any other war, as the French Revolution kicked off the Napoleonic Wars, a 20-year period where Napoleon led France, fighting almost every other country in Europe. This is also tied to the idea of backlash against historical movements, as when the French Revolution came and brought a republic into France, the rest of Europe just turned against them as they were worried that their totalitarian conservative monarchies would all be replaced by new republics. This could be tied to all sorts of movements across history where people in the order that's being upset by a new social change are fighting against that change actively. And that happens over and over again throughout history. There are so many things we can tie that to. In the end, the French Revolution failed as it was replaced by a monarchy when Napoleon finally surrendered and was sent to the South Atlantic at the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815. So if you ever are writing about a movement or war or anything else where the group of people you're writing about failed, you can tie that as well to the French Revolution. The fourth specific piece of historical evidence is the American Declaration of Independence. The Declaration of Independence in the United States was one of the most influential documents in world history. So anytime you're using a document as a source and you believe this document was influential in history, you can compare it to the Declaration of Independence. In spite of just that superficial idea of them both being documents, there are so many connections you could make to non-document sources like events or photographs or anything else, because the Declaration of Independence carried so much historical meaning behind it. It kicked off the Age of Revolution in the late 1700s and early 1800s, which saw revolutions for independence and democracy in the United States, in France, in Haiti, and parts all over Latin America. And this could be tied not only to all of those revolutions, but also the movements for independence and democracy that happened in decolonization after World War II, where nations all over the Southern Hemisphere fought for their independence and their right to rule themselves. Also, you can look back to the end of the Middle Ages in Europe, where the ideas of the Enlightenment said that people could think for themselves and that the power of government came from the people. You could tie it to really any intellectual movement throughout world history that you have to write about, and you could also tie it to a lot of those revolutions as well. The fifth major piece of historical evidence is the Cold War. Although the Cold War was an entire era of history spanning from the mid-1900s all the way to the 21st century, if you talk about a specific aspect of it, it can count for specific historical evidence. And since there were so many topics and so many different things that went on during the Cold War, you can relate it to practically any essay you'll be writing. If you're writing about war, you can talk about the many proxy conflicts that happened between the US and the Soviet Union. If you're talking about economics, change, or comparison, talk about capitalism versus communism. That happened during the Cold War. Are you talking about technological change and development? Talk about the arms races during the Cold War, where both sides raced to develop better and better technologies for missiles, tanks, and even nukes. Are you talking about ideology? Then maybe dictatorship versus democracy, would be relevant to that. The Cold War just has so many different topics that happened within it that you could relate, and it's such a broad theme that it's easy to remember, but you can apply it to practically any essay you'll be writing, and it'll still count for that specific historical evidence piece. These 5 pieces of evidence can be used in any essay in a part where in the rubric where you need to put in evidence that's not provided in a document or source that College Board gives you for the exam. Although knowing these 5 facts won't substitute for having a clear understanding of all of the course material relevant to the essay question, it can give you a piece of historical evidence that you can use for any essay topic and could even secure for you that point for complex historical thinking. I hope this takes some stress off of you for the studying process. Do well on the test.